안녕하세요. Who did the lucky draw? Any winners in the room? Lucky draw winners? No? Okay, we're still waiting for a few people to come in. So while we do that, let me introduce myself and then get to know you a little bit better. So we're going to be talking about new 2D features in Unity. So these are only the new 2D features in Unity. There are a lot more that we are not covering today, but I will talk about some of the fairly recent ones as well, a little bit. So how many of you in the audience put up your hand if you are making a 2D game? Making a 2D game right now. Very cool. How many of you are programmers? Everyone. Oh no, okay, cool. How many artists? And designers? Okay, very, very cool. Some of the same hands went up. How many of you are producers? You are producers in a studio. There's normally one or two. There we go. And these are the guys who actually get the project to work, right? Actually get things done, so very, very cool. So what I'd like to cover today is more of the 2D features, the changes that we've added. We're going to look at some demos. And I'm Russ Scammell. I'm the product manager for 2D with Unity Technologies. And I'm going to take you through some of these features now. OK, so let's start with world building. Right? So these are the features that are used for building levels and for building your worlds that you are inviting your users into. And the main change, the main update that I want to talk about today is Sprite Shape. How many of you use the package manager? Can I get a show of hands? Package manager, put up your hands. OK, if you are not using the package manager, you need to start using it, because all the new features in Unity are coming out in the package manager. And if you want to see almost all of the new 2D features, they're going to be in there as well. So how many of you have used Sprite Shape? Anyone knows what this is? OK, so we will take a look at that as well. So the new stuff for Sprite Shape is that it's a lot faster with C# jobs. You get more accurate mesh generation and collider generation. And you get an improvement in what we call the sprite variant selection. So I'll show you how all of that stuff works shortly. Also, if you're using the fills for the Sprite Shape, you can use stretched UVs now to get UVs that adapt to the size of your Sprite Shape. And finally, we've improved the tangents on the control points for the Sprite Shape spline. OK, so let's take a look at the demos so that those of you who are new to Sprite Shape can see what a Sprite Shape is. And then I will show you some of the new features that we've been adding. OK, let's jump into Unity. OK, so this is a Sprite Shape. What does this mean? Let me walk you through, give you the short explanation. So a Sprite Shape is a way of distributing or laying out your sprites on the screen using a shape. Right? In this case, we have a shape here. So I'm going to show you. This is a shape that has a sprite tiled on the outside and also tiled on the inside, right? Tiled on the edge and tiled in the fill. So when you have something like this, you can move it around, right? And you can change the handles on it. So how do you make one of these? So first of all, you need to make a Sprite Shape profile, right? Which is one of these. And you do that by going to Create Sprite Shape Profile, right? You can make an open shape or a closed shape. What we see here is a closed shape. And when you do that, you get one of these. So what you do here is you define certain angle ranges, and then you define the sprite that's going to be on the edge of the angles, right? On the edge of the shape, I should say. So you can define more than one sprite per shape, per angle range, and they can look like this, right? or you can have more realistic looking things like rocks or grass. So that's very cool. But how have we been designing it so that you can change these in the scene? It's been a little bit harder before, and we've improved that. So the first thing I want to show you is how to select these different variants. So once you've made one of these sprite shapes, you can just drag it into the screen like this, right? And it will create a sprite shape there. Here's one that I dragged in earlier. And what you can do is you can change the shape of this object. You can add more control points, right? You can do all sorts of cool stuff. And you would use this typically to form your level. So alongside this is the idea of a collider. So you can just add a polygon collider to this, and the sprite shape will conform, the collider will conform to the sprite shape. So this is it's a very fast way to build levels in 2D. Maybe I'll just show you briefly the collider so you can see how that works. So I'm going to add a polygon collider 2D. And if we look at the collider, we can see that it is conforming to the shape here. Okay, cool. So let's get rid of that. And I want to show you the variant selection. So you'll notice that when I select one of these points, like so, I can now see the sprite variants showing up here. Right? And for each of these segments on the sprite shape, we can choose a different sprite. Right? So I can select this one and put the rocks down there, or the grass. Or I can select all of it and just change it into a rock or grass level. Right? Like so. And if I move these around, it will adapt accordingly. Okay, so that was the sprite variants, right? The other thing that we wanted to change was the fill. So let's say that we've got this like this, right? And let's say that I'm resizing this because I'm trying to make my level. So I'll grab a few points and I'll make my level. But I want the interior, the fill of the sprite shape, to adapt accordingly. So now we can do stretch UVs here, right? And I can just do that, and then I can have the equivalent of a stretch. Oops, a little bit slow down there. You can see that it's now stretching to fit into that space. Cool. And if you want more tiling, you can turn this up or down, right? This is the tiling in the sprite shape, and I can just turn that up to whatever I want. Cool. So these are the changes that we've made to sprite shape, and a very brief introduction to those of you who have never seen this feature. Okay, we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to move on to the next section, which is animation. Okay. So animation in 2D was also released as a package. Can I get a show of hands? Put up your hand if you've used the animation package. Has anyone used it? 1, 2, 3. Okay, waiting for the interpreter. Good? Okay, great. So some people have tried it out, but it is in preview, right? So I understand if you haven't used it in production yet. The goal is to get animation to production ready by the end of this year, or by the last quarter of this year. What I want to talk about there, the new changes to animation, are Sprite Swap. So sprite swapping is this idea of once you've rigged your animation, you've made all of the bones, you've started to animate everything, sometimes you want to change the sprite that is attached to the bone. Again, if you haven't used the animation tool, you may not know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to take you through some of the animation tooling as well. But the typical use case is if you have a character, right? And you have, sometimes the character has a hand that shows good. Sometimes you have it so hi, right? Sometimes it's an open palm, it's a thumb, maybe it's a peace signal, right? Or maybe you want to change the eyes, right? Because maybe the character is happy or angry, right? And you want to change the sprite that is rigged to the face. Or maybe mouth shapes, because you are trying to lip sync it to some audio that you have. Okay, so what we're going to do with this is just spend a bit of time looking at Sprite Swap. And because we have some new users in the audience, I'll show you a little bit of the animation tools as well. So let's start in Photoshop. Okay, so let's say you have a character like this in Photoshop. Your artist has spent some time making this character, and if we look over here, we can see that the character is made up of layers, right? So these are all different layers, just the hair, right? And then the different sections. So maybe what you want to do is to animate this character. So what we're going to do is import this into Unity and show you how you can animate the different body parts. But the new feature that I want to focus on is called Sprite Swap. So let's say that the character has a left hand, right? And you've made a group, and you've got an open hand, right? And maybe you've also got thumbs up. And you want to have an expression where the character is talking, and sometimes you want to change this sprite. So your artist has set up all of this, has named the layers correctly, and you want to bring this into Unity. Okay, so let's go to Unity. All right, so we'll look at that character later. What I want to focus on is that when we import a sprite, a PSD or a PSB file in this case into Unity, it comes in as a prefab like this, okay? So let's focus on these import settings here. So what we've got here is a PSD importer, and it is able to read the different layers and the different data that you have in your Photoshop file, and you can do things like import only visible layers, so maybe you have hidden construction layers. Maybe you want to mosaic the character. What that means is we'll turn it into a sheet for you. You want to set it up for character rig. Maybe you want to use layer grouping to do something, right? So for now, we're just importing it like we import a sprite, and we can look at it in the sprite editor. Okay, so what it comes in as initially is like this. Now, I want you to look at Photoshop, all in layers, right? And then we bring it into Unity, and we mosaic it for you. We turn it into a sprite sheet. So when you play the game, when you make the build, it's just this one texture that gets sent in. You don't need all of the layers that you had in Photoshop, right? So that's a little bit more performant. The next thing to look at is the skinning editor. So this is where you do all of that setup for the characters. Okay, so for those of you who are new to this, this is a set of tools that we designed for setting up characters. So I'll take you through this briefly. Here we have the preview pose, right? So we can see how the character looks. And because we have put bones in the character, which you can create with the Create Bone tool, and you've edited them, you can now do things like see how the arm moves. Remember, this is a single layer in Photoshop, and you can deform these things, right? So that's pretty cool. And then you'll notice here we have both of those sprites, right? We have this one and this one together. So what we want to do is to turn them into variants of each other. So we're going to open the visibility toolbar, visibility toolbar here. And we can see that we can see all of the bones, and we can see the sprites. So all of the names here are following the names that you set up in Photoshop. So your artist who has put in all of that effort to name their layers in Photoshop, thank you very much, artists who name your layers in Photoshop, you can see all of the information there. So that's really cool. But what we want to do is we want to turn the left hand into a variant. So what we do is we right-click here, and we convert group to category. So we're taking the group from Photoshop, and we're turning it into a category. Now, you don't have to do this way, but we've set it up for people who have set up layer groups so that it's easier for them to do. So here we have a category called left hand, and we have an index for the different sprites, right? So we have index 0 and index 1. So why would you want to do all of this? The big reason is you want to animate. You want to animate a change in your sprite. If you tried to do this previously and you change the sprite, you will not be able to share that animation clip across different characters. But because here you are just animating an index, if you have one character, maybe you have a goblin and he is rigged, and then you've made variations of that goblin, but you've made all of the animations for your first goblin, you can now share them across all of your other characters, right? Being able to share the animation clip is a huge advantage. The second reason you might want to use this is you are making a wardrobe system, right? You're making a game where people are changing their head, changing their armor, they have picked up different equipment, and you want to be able to swap between those based on what they are using in their inventory. Cool? Okay, so when we're done with all that, we drag it into the scene, right? Well, not yet. I want to explain a little bit about what happens under the hood. So when we did that, we actually added a new component called Sprite Lib. So a Sprite Lib, or a Sprite library, is a collection of different sprites. And here we have the different sprites for the left hand, which is thumbs up and open palm. Okay? So now we'll look at the character in the scene, and we can see we've got a Sprite library component here. And that Sprite library component contains all of those different things, right? So maybe you have different hats in there, or maybe you have a whole character skin, things like this. Now, for the part of the character that we want to swap, we go down to the left hand, I think it was. What we did was we added a sprite resolver. Now, a sprite resolver over here, that will look up into your hierarchy and find the sprite library and then extract the correct index. So here we can see that it's finding the left-hand category, and at the moment it's set up for the left-hand thumbs-up index. So if I just click here in the sprite resolver, you can see that I can just swap it out like that and try out the different variants. Cool? Now, again, because this is an index, we can just come over here and animate it. So if you look down here, let me zoom in nice and close. We have the sprite resolver index as a property in the animation over there. And we have added keyframes, right? So as we animate the character, we can also swap. So this is very useful for a variety of animations. So if we look at this now, there we go. We can see it's changing based on the keyframes. So if I hit play, and there is my masterpiece, right? Completely animated, and it's changing as you go. So you can use this for your own characters and do a lot more complicated animations than this. Cool, so that's 2D character animation in Unity, as well as Sprite Swap. Something to keep in mind, you don't have to have multi-layer characters. You can just drag in a PNG and rig it in Unity. That's good as well. So you can work with multiple setups. You can work with multiple sprites or single sprites or a combination of the two. Or you can just import your PSD file that has all of these layers, and then you can just rig that and take advantage of all of this good stuff, all of these features. Okay, so I want to keep us on track for the next session as well. So I'm mindful of the time, but we're going to spend the next section of the presentation on graphics, right? So this is where we've been making the most changes in Unity, in 2D. And specifically, we've added a 2D renderer to the lightweight render pipeline. Right? So that's a 2D renderer specific for 2D rendering, for all of your 2D rendering needs in lightweight render pipeline. This gives us 2D lights, which we're going to look at today. Pixel Perfect Camera will now move into this 2D renderer. If you have used the Pixel Perfect component before, that will still exist, but we are adding it to the 2D renderer, and all future versions of Pixel Perfect Camera will be updated inside the 2D renderer. The current component, the current package, will still be maintained with bug fixes, but all of the new features will be added here. Because we are a renderer, this also means that we get shader graph master nodes, which means that you can write your own shaders for 2D, right, in shader graph. So you get two of these. You get one for lit sprites, or sprites that are affected by light, and unlit sprites. OK, so what is it? What are these 2D lights? So what is it made of? The first and most obvious component is a 2D light component. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at what this has. There's a lot of exciting sliders and values that we're going to play around with here. And there are several different types of lights. And then there's the 2D renderer data. So if you've used the render pipelines, this is how you get those renderers to work. And this is where the main reason you might want to use this is if you want to change the blend styles. So I'll show you a little bit about that. It's the way the different lights blend together. Cool. You also get some related features, which is a secondary textures module in the sprite editor window. So this means that we can define things like normal maps, and in this case, a mask texture that we're going to use later, and those shader graph master nodes as well. So keep in mind all of the different parts that get added when you get a 2D renderer. And now we're going to look at some demos. We're going to look at the different 2D light types, and then we're going to look at normal maps, and then finally masks. Oh, not ready for this one yet. OK, let's start here. OK, so when you start with a blank scene, you don't see anything, right? And that's expected because there are no lights, right? So there are some sprites in the scene, and we have already set up the renderer. And let me just show you how you do that. But you don't see anything yet. So let me show you where the renderer is. So the renderer is in your here. It's in your render pipeline. And you create one by going to Create, Rendering, Lightweight Render Pipeline, 2D Renderer. OK? We'll be providing some quality of life features to help you out in the future to make this easier. But at the moment, that is what you would need to do. Again, this feature is not available right now. The next version of Lightweight Render Pipeline, when that goes out, you'll have the 2D renderer in that. And we are a few days away from that right now. So when you make a 2D renderer, what you want to do is you want to go to your project settings, right? And under graphics. So this is the first thing you'll need to do. You need to be set up with the lightweight render pipeline asset. And once that is set up, you can see it here. This is the lightweight render pipeline asset. What we want to do is set the renderer type to custom and the data to the 2D renderer data. OK, let's say that we've gotten through all of that configuration. What do we get? So the first thing is a type of light called global. Right? So this is essentially like an ambient light for 2D. Right? So if we turn this on, you can see, suddenly I can see everything in the scene. Right? Cool. And you can change the color of this. Right? This can be whatever color you want. Right? OK. And we'll explore the other settings on the lights as we go. But there are some common settings that we will see on the different lights as we play with them. And I'll zoom in on that in a minute so we can see more. OK, the second type of light I want to tell you about is a parametric light. So this one, I'm going to turn it on now. It's a shape, right? It's a shape that has multiple sides. So here we can see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit over here. We can see that it has multiple sides, and we can change those sides accordingly, right? So you can make different shapes. You can also change the fall off. So at the moment, the radius is very small, but if I make the radius bigger and I turn the fall off down, you can see that I can use this to do some certain effects, right? And we can change the fall off intensity. Do we want it to fall off by a lot or by a little? Yep. Okay, cool. And then next up, sprite lights. So in this case, we've got a light that is going to be driven by a sprite, right? So here's the sprite down here, and it looks like that, right? So I want to put this into the light so that it acts like a cookie across the scene. So this is a sprite light over here. I'm just going to turn that on. Cool. So with all of these, again, you can play with color, intensity, and blend style. More on blend style later. So you can turn this intensity up, right? You can play around with the color. You can also, this is a very important feature, you can choose what sorting layers the light affects. So if you have multiple sorting layers in your game and you want the light to only affect the background, then I can turn off one of them, and now the light is only affecting the background. So just to make this really clear, let me turn off the global light. See? This light is only shining on the background. So if I turn it back on again, there you see, it's affecting the other stuff. And then I'll turn on the global light so we can see all of it working together. Okay, and the last type of light that you can do, well, not last, second last, is freeform. So this is a freeform light. Right? Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see what I'm playing with. So this is a light that is based on a shape that you can edit. Right? So here I'm making it look like there's a tractor beam from an alien spaceship coming from off screen, right? Trying to abduct someone. Or maybe you can use it to create certain kinds of accenting in your levels, right? This is a part of the level that's green. Maybe this other part is red. This other part is pink. Right, all these different kinds of things that you want to do. And you can just change, you can play around with these shapes as you see fit. Cool. So the last light type is a point light. So point lights look like this. Okay, so this is a point light. And here, I'm going to turn up the intensity a little bit so you can see how it works. Here you can control the inner radius and the outer radius. You can also control the size of the light, like so, right? Oh, like that. And then probably my favorite part of this is that when you control the outer radius, you can also point that light where you want it. Right? So very often when you're working with lights, you want to make sure that it's pointed in a particular direction. Okay, so we'll turn up the intensity, nice and cool. Spread that around, and there you go. Right? So lots of really cool light types to play around with in 2D. Okay, now let's look at a couple of other features that come along with the ability to do this. Right? So let's look at normal maps. So here's a typical, just an asteroid, a flat sprite. It's being lit by one of our global lights, but also by a freeform light. And you can see as I move the freeform light around, it doesn't really impact the surface of this object. It doesn't look like there's any surface detail on this object. So what we want to do is we want to add a normal map to this. So I'm going to show you, this is the rock. But if I look at the sprite editor window for this, there is actually a new section here called secondary textures, right? And if I click on that, you can see that we have a normal map and an outline. Okay, so this normal map was generated in Photoshop. There are other tools that can help you with this as well. And this one also similarly generated from that source asset. So what are we going to do with these? So I'll show you the mask later, but for now we're going to look at the normal map. So because this glow rock here has a normal map, any lights that are affecting it can use normal maps. So I'm going to zoom in here again. Here's a light, parametric light. We're going to turn on normal map. Okay, on. So now we have some depth in the scene, right? And you can control the distance of this normal map. So now we're pretending that it's 0.5 units from the surface of the screen, right? So 0.5 units. Or you can make it look like it's coming from much further behind. So let's turn that back to 0.5. Oop, not the intensity, the distance. Okay, and then let's hit play. There you go. So suddenly the block that looked kind of flat earlier now seems to have some depth, right? So that's kind of cool. It looks like 2D is becoming 3D, right? So very nice. Okay, the last section I want to show you is on masks. So let's take a look at this project, this scene, I should say. So here we have, again, a light. We have another key light, and we have a global light. But the interesting thing about the rim light here is that the blend style is rim and not default. So what is rim, and how do I set it up? So that's just a name that I chose. And if I go into the sprite renderer data that we made earlier, we can set up a blend style, name it ourselves, and then choose a mask texture channel. In this case, I'm going to use 1 - R. Okay, so let's not worry too much about what this means, apart from I want to take effect only on the black areas of a texture. Okay, and I've made the blend mode additive here. Right, so we saw the glow rock earlier. It had that mask. We're going to use that wherever this light goes, right? So here's the rim light, and if I move this around the scene, you can see that it affects other objects as if you are behind them, right? So this is quite a nice effect. The other thing to notice is that the rim light is actually using the normal map, so that if you look at this character, you can see that if I turn off the normal map, it just lights the whole outline. But because you have a normal map, it knows that that section of the character is behind, has normals facing in that direction, right? So it creates that idea of directionality. So if I hit play now, there we go. You can see a pretty nice effect, it's quite subtle, of a light that seems to be shining from behind the character. Cool. Okay. So that is all of the demos. So how do you get your hands on all of this? So it's important to keep in mind. I repeat one more time, Package Manager, right? So if you're not using Package Manager, you need to get it. It's in your window drop-down under Package Manager. And just to show you, all of the 2D features, except for lights, all of the 2D features are at the top. So 2D animation, 2D IK, 2D PSD importer, and 2D Sprite Shape. So if you wanted to do the stuff that had to do with Sprite Shape, you want to get the 2D Sprite Shape package. The animation stuff is 2D animation, 2D IK, and 2D PSD importer. Sprite Swap, which we saw today, this one, right? That's available in 19.2 only. So you want the latest version of Unity to play around with that. And for 2D lights, this is coming to 19.2 only. You need to wait for the next version of the lightweight render pipeline. When that comes out, you'll get to play with all the 2D lights. And now I want to tell you what you can do. Oh, still taking photos? 3, 2, 1. Okay, so what you can do. So because we are developing all of these features and we're putting them in preview and we're allowing people to try them out, we need you to try them out, right? So then we know whether or not we have built something that is useful to your project, whether we have missed something. If it works, come and let us know, right? Send us an email, write to us in the forums. The 2D team is very active in the forums and wants to hear from you. So if you're using it and it works, let us know. If it doesn't work, let us know. If we've missed something, if there's a feature that you must have for your next project, let us know. And the way to do that is to jump into the forums, right? Visit the forums, because we are guided by the projects that you make. What are you building? Let us know that as well. And how are you trying to build it so that we can support the workflows that you use to build your games and your experiences for your users. And last of all, keep making amazing 2D experiences in Unity. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.